What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? Let's do a free agency podcast discussing first base platoon options and some under the radar dudes that the D-backs should be targeting for both the DH and the bullpen.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. On today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, we're doing a free agent heavy podcast discussing first base platoon options for the D-backs and then taking a look at some under the radar DHs and relievers the D-backs should be targeting this offseason. But first, I want to say thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, or reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and it's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. Now let's get into the podcast and let's discuss some under the radar, not even under the radar, but some platoon options. Segment 2 and 3 will be some under the radar guys. But I want to discuss some platoon options at first base for the D-backs because, as we know, Christian Walker, D-backs star player, is a free agent, and the odds of him leaving, I mean, I've always felt like Christian Walker is going to come back, but he's going to have a lot of suitors this offseason. He's going to have a lot of money thrown his way, so the odds of him leaving the D-backs are probably as high as him staying with Arizona. But if Christian Walker does leave the D-backs are going to have to come up with a contingency plan, a plan B, right? One thing that they can do is just go with an internal option. Pavin Smith, who's coming off a pretty decent season, maybe the best season of his career. I think a lot of people would say that, where he had a career high OPS. The slugging for the first time ever looked legit. 9 home runs in 60 games. Like, we finally got to see some power from Pavin. And so it is set up, if Christian Walker leaves, for Pavin to have some major playing time next season. But the question is he going to be an everyday player? Because I think Pavin Smith, the door is set up for him to get a lot of opportunity next year if Christian Walker leaves. But I think most of that opportunity will come as a platoon first base, as a guy, lefty first baseman, go out there and crush right-handed pitching. 280 average, 920 OPS in 55 games against right-handed pitching last season. So if you're looking at the free agent market this year, who could be the best platoon options to pair with a Pavin Smith at first base? Because maybe you could find someone that's a decent right-handed bat. Of course, not someone that's as good as Christian Walker, but if Pavin Smith can replicate the season he just had over 100 games, and then you can add in someone that could platoon with Pavin Smith to split that timeshare, maybe that is the answer to the D-backs first base problem next year. I want to bring back Christian Walker. That's the answer I want. But in case that does not happen, let's look at a contingency plan, because the first guy that the D-backs to bring back, that we've discussed already on this podcast, to platoon with Pavin Smith, let's reunite with former friend, former face of the franchise, Paul Goldschmidt, who is 2 years removed from the MVP. Seems crazy. 2022, he was the best player in the National League. And now we're like, is Paul Goldschmidt washed? He's not washed yet, but he seems pretty close with the season he just had in 2024 at the Cardinals, where the power was still there. We know Paul Goldschmidt, one of those guys, historically is a slow starter, but this was a slower start than most seasons for Paul Goldschmidt, where through the first 92 games of the year, 664 OPS. So it took him a while to get going. And even the second half of the year, a 799 OPS, like much better, but it's not like Paul Goldschmidt's putting up those MVP numbers like he used to in the second half of the season. So Goldschmidt still provides good pop, still good defensive player, still overall offensively not bad, but is he an everyday major leaguer at this point of his career? I'm not too sure about that. He's better than Pavin Smith. Maybe he shouldn't be a platoon player with Pavin Smith, but maybe the best version of Paul Goldschmidt is actually a platoon player. Maybe that is his reality in 2025. So you pair him, bring back former friend with a little Pavin Smith. That could be a pretty nice first base duo. How about Pavin Smith, a little Carlos Santana, another guy we've discussed as a potential option in case Christian Walker leaves, but as a platoon guy with Pavin Smith, like Santana coming off a season where he played 150 games at first base with the Twins, really good defensive player this past year, winning the Gold Glove at first base, still had 23 bombs at age 38. Like at this point, at age 39, entering next season, like he's kind of the perfect platoon player where he still showed he can play a full season and provide pop, provide defense, but maybe at age 39, he shouldn't have to play 160 games. If he's playing around 100 with the skill set he has to platoon with Pavin Smith, like that could be the perfect scenario for an older guy in Carlos Santana who still has stuff left in the tank. It's not like both Santana and Goldschmidt, yes, they're on the downside of their career, but neither of those guys are washed yet. Both of those guys still have talent left in the tank. I think a Carlos Santana could be a really nice platoon piece with the Pavin Smith. How about a guy we just saw with Arizona Diamondbacks? How about a Josh Bell? What if we bring back 6'4", 260 Josh Bell with the Dbacks, who had a decent year, 725 OPS, 19 home runs in 145 games. Josh Bell is a solid player. Is he the guy that hit 37 bombs and was an all-star back in 2019 with over 900 OPS? No, he's probably going to be a guy that's in that 710 to 750 OPS. If you're lucky, if he's playing, 130 games. Hopefully he's around 18 home runs. Like he's got some pop. He plays solid defense. He is a switch hitter, which is nice. So he could play on both sides of the plate. But Josh Bell is definitely a platoon player. He's definitely a guy that you want as a super utility guy. I wouldn't want Josh Bell as my everyday first baseman. If he's platooning with a Pavin Smith, I would be very happy about that because we saw when Christian Walker was out, there would be stretches where he'd be really good and be a really strong contributor to this offense. But then he would also have stretches where he just did nothing offensively for the D-backs. He's definitely a guy that's, not afraid to, his strikeout numbers really aren't bad at all. He was actually below 20% last year in terms of K rate, but it felt like he had strikeouts in like big moments, or he would just have like a double play in a big moment. Felt like there would be clutch situations where Josh Bell didn't always come through. But if he's platooning with Pavin Smith, I don't think that's the worst option in the world. Then the final guy I want to discuss, who I think is someone pretty intriguing coming off a down year. One of those guys, a lot of strikeouts, kind of home run or bust. Patrick Wisdom coming off a terrible season, only 8 home runs in 75 games. But the last 3 years prior to 2024, like this was one of the best, like bang for your buck power hitters in terms of like games played, because you look at 2023, 23 home runs in 97 games. The year before, 25 bombs in 134 games, 28 home runs in 106 games in 2021. So typically this is a guy who always low average, like a 210 average, typically a ton of strikeouts. Like he's kind of a Eugenio-esque where it's like high strikeout rate, hard contact, some pop, but not going to have a high average. Patrick Wisdom is coming off a terrible year where he batted 170, 629 OPS, but typically he is more of that dude who, not Kyle Schwarber, but typically he is like, okay, if he's playing 100 games, like he's probably going to give you 20 plus home runs, a 750 OPS, and bat like 200. Like as a DH option, like Patrick Wisdom as a potential first base option, I think Patrick Wisdom could be in line for maybe a potential bounce back and could be like a perfect addition with his power hitting from the right side of the plate with a Pavin Smith could actually be if you could get the bounce back from Patrick Wisdom, if you could get the guy that was like the previous 3 seasons to 2024, like that's the perfect kind of platoon piece to go with a Pavin Smith. So those are my 4 names I'm throwing out right now: Paul Goldschmidt, Carlos Santana, Josh Bell, and Patrick Wisdom as potential platoon pieces to mix with a Pavin Smith. Now I want to discuss some under the radar free agent DH options the D-backs should consider in 2025. But hey, if you want to place a little wager down on an upcoming Arizona Cardinals game, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be FanDuel, because get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. I've hit my last 3 same game parlays, and the fun thing about them, I've done those parlays live during the game, and so that's the great thing about FanDuel. You don't got to do the parlay before the game. You can do a live same game parlay, which has brought me some money and a big smile on my face. So if you want the same feeling as me, just visit fanduel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's fanduel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming Arizona event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Time, because Game Time is the best place for last minute tickets on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. I honestly use Game Time anytime I'm buying tickets. They have the all-in pricing feature, which shows you your total cost up front when you toggle that little feature on. It's fantastic. I used Game Time this past weekend. I bought tickets 2 hours before the Usher concert for way cheaper than what I saw it going for the last couple weeks. So Game Time is the best for last minute tickets and deals and whatever you need. They have the lowest price guarantee too, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss some under the radar DH options that the D-backs should consider targeting this offseason. And the first guy I want to discuss, like, in terms of under the radarness, like, he's kind of still has like name value, I think, a little bit. But if you look at like a top 100 free agent list, like, you wouldn't find him. But if your team signed him, you know who he is. Eloy Jimenez was one of the most tantalizing prospects of the last few years, a guy that just hasn't been able to live up to his potential because of injuries and being in a terrible White Sox organization. But when you're talking about under the radar, high risk, high reward flyers, Eloy Jimenez, who is still only 27 years of age, turns 28 November 27th. This is a guy where, if he's right, if he can put it together as your DH, he can legitimately come in and maybe, as we saw in 2019, as a rookie in 122 games, he smashed 31 home runs, and that kind of potential is still within him. He still has the pop. In 2022, we saw him hit 16 home runs in 84 games. He had 18 home runs in 120 games in 2023. The issue is the health of this man has been so bad the last few years, is never able to get into any sort of rhythm or groove. And I think it's been a big reason why he's felt like such a disappointment. And now you look at his numbers from this past season, really, really disappointing. But so many players on that White Sox team was disappointed this year. That was just a terrible season by that organization who has been doing malpractice the last few years. So I want to say Eloy Jimenez potentially in a new environment could be a lot better. Obviously, he was traded to Baltimore last year where things really did not improve, but let's get him a full offseason in like Arizona, get him with all the boys throughout the summer, working with the bros and everything, building that camaraderie through the offseason, through training camp, through spring training, and then let's see what it looks like game one on opening day, because I still think there's a lot of talent within Eloy Jimenez. Someone just has to bring it out of him. So I do like him as a potential DH option. Next up, how about Jesse Winker? And he's like the perfect DH platoon guy. Like, if the D-backs want to once again get 2 guys to be their platoon, Jesse Winker from the left side is absolutely perfect, because This is a guy who you look at the numbers and he's only good against right-handed pitching. The career numbers tell you Jesse Winker cannot be an everyday player. Against left-handed pitchers, Winker for his career, 210 average, 661 OPS. But against righties, 276 average at 841 OPS. He's an all-star level player when he goes against right-handed pitching. And so for Jesse Winker, if you brought him as a DH to be that Randall Grichuk, Jock Peterson, just one half of the DH for next season, go find your other half. Maybe it is Randall Grichuk. Maybe it's Winker and Grichuk as your two DHs for next season. Obviously, we'll all love Grichuk back. We'll see if that's possible. But Winker coming off a season where he did put up decent numbers, 760 OPS in 145 games, 14 bombs, 14 stolen bases. Just make this guy a dude who only goes against right-handed pitching, and he will produce pretty solid offensive numbers for you. Winker, not the greatest defensive player. He can play a little corner outfield if we need him to. He's like an all right defender. Where we need him is a little pop from the left side. I still think he is a decent offensive bat. I really liked him back in 2021 with the Cincinnati Reds when he had that monster season. But even in 2021, when you really dive into the numbers for Jesse Winker, even 21 when he was an all-star, 346 average and a 1070 OPS against righties, and against lefties, 177 average, 572 OPS. So this is a righty killer, and I would love him as one half of the DH for the Dbacks. Next up, someone I think is super intriguing and could potentially be the backup to Gabriel Moreno, Gary Sanchez. Maybe you don't want him as a backup because defensively he's never been considered a good player, but offensively, this guy has pop. And if you're telling me he's just coming in to be the DH, like that does intrigue me a little bit. He is a guy who is going to strike out a ton. You have to be prepared for that. 27% K rate this past year. It's been in the mid 20s like the last 4 years, but this is a guy who's, for his career, 27% K rate. So he is a guy that's going to strike out a good amount, but also the hard contact stats love Gary Sanchez. Career 91 mile an hour exit velocity with a 47% hard hit percentage. Like this guy crushes the ball. He still hit he only had 11 home runs last year in 89 games, but that's still decent. And the year before in 2023, 19 home runs in 75 games. And so when talking about power, like this guy can do it. Maybe he's not going to hit a high average. Yes, he's going to strike out a ton, but if you are talking about like bringing in Winker and a Gary Sanchez, do Winker to crush right-handed pitching and then Gary Sanchez to crush left-handed pitching, like that's kind of a fun DH platoon. And then you could still use Sanchez as your potential backup guy to Gabriel Moreno if you wanted to do that. I mean, your other catcher, Adrian Del Castillo, is pretty much Gary Sanchez 2.0, right? All offense, no defense. Not like Jose Herrera is doing much for you last year. So if you just want a guy that could be a body at catcher, but at least give you some offensive upside, I would not be mad at all if the D-backs want to go after Gary Sanchez. Then the final guy I want to discuss is someone that we've seen in the NL West this past year. Michael Conforto. Never been a Conforto guy, but the numbers are decent for him. 759 OPS, 20 home runs this past year in 130 games. Defensively, he's kind of cooked. He should not really play outfield much, but if you're bringing him in as a lefty power bat who still hit 20 home runs last year, like Conforto, I would not mind at all in that kind of scenario. The reason I didn't like Conforto on the Giants is because the Giants viewed Conforto and brought him in to be like prime Conforto. Like they needed like 2017 Conforto, 2020 Conforto, like the guy who's like making all-star teams. Like that's the kind of Conforto that the Giants needed. And I did not expect that Conforto to come back. That's why I was like not in on Conforto when he was a San Fran guy, because they were like, this guy's not a star player. Like our offense is going to be cooked. But for the D-backs, like we just need him to be like the 7th best player in our lineup. And I would love him as that. I think he could really thrive in that kind of situation. Mostly just a fastball killer, really struggles against breaking off speed pitches. Like that's the perfect kind of DH from the left side. Just wait for your fastball and crush it as a lefty power bat. I would be fine with that. So Michael Conforto is someone that would be intrigued by the D-backs bringing in as a DH. Now I want to discuss some under the radar relievers that the D-backs should think about going after for their bullpen in segment number 3. But hey, I want to talk to you guys now about this little app that I use to get me cash back when I make purchases called Abada because love the holidays but hate grocery shopping. Abada is making your Thanksgiving easier with cash back on everything you need to make your perfect holiday meal. So you can get that turkey you've always wanted or your favorite sides for free. This month, Abada is giving new users 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast. Just add the offers in the app to redeem for everything you need to make your Thanksgiving feast complete. All you have to do is shop at your favorite retailers and upload your receipt. You can also earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Download the Ibotta app now and use code LOCKDOWNMLB to get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast starting November 1st. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or Apple App Store and use code LOCKEDONMLB. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss some under the radar relievers for the D-backs that they should consider looking at this offseason. The first guy I want to discuss, a little Yimmy Garcia, who I think is a very interesting guy because I think he is someone that is talented. Maybe he's a little flawed, but I think the talent outweighs the flaws when looking at Yimmy Garcia. He is a guy that has dealt with some elbow issues last year, so maybe that's something that creeps in the back of your mind of could this guy potentially get surgery down the line if we see those elbow issues crop up once again. He didn't need it this past season, so he was fine. But the reason I bring up those potential elbow issues like rearing its head down the line is because he was throwing harder than ever this past season. And so when your velocity is up, when your strikeout numbers are up, that seems to lead to some elbow issues down the line. So Yimmy right now is fine. He's healthy right now. He's coming off a season where he averaged 96 on his fastball. The strikeout rate was very high as well, 32% K rate, 3.46 ERA rate this past year. Been flirting with the mid threes the last like 3 seasons. I think Yimmy is a guy who has very good strikeout numbers coming off a very good season. Yimmy maybe he's a little expensive because he is coming off the good season with a good velocity, but I still think he's under the radar when thinking about most of the relievers on this free agent market. So Yimmy Garcia is someone that I would love the D-backs to consider bringing in this offseason. Next up, this is a guy who's like in that Nick Martinez mold where he could either be maybe a back end starter for you, a long reliever. Like this guy is versatile, but he's also good. Spencer Turnbull is someone that I am very intrigued by because he was having a very good season before he got hurt and had to miss the rest of the year. But a 2.65 ERA and 54 innings pitch, pretty good strikeout numbers, decent walk rate, very good whip. Like Spencer was having a very good season, but is also a guy who's had such a weird career. Made 7 starts in 2023 with the Tigers, was terrible. Didn't pitch at all in 2022. Was good in like 21 and 2020 and like 2019 was like decent, but this is a guy who just hasn't had a ton of starts like the last 5 years. He's got like what under he has like under 30 starts under his belt like the last like 4 or 5 years as a primary starter guy. But this past season, when he was healthy, he was kind of that Nick Martinez mold where he was coming out the pen sometimes, being a spot starter for the Phillies, and he really thrived in that situation. And so if you're telling me Spencer is fully healthy entering next year, he could be a guy that, you know what, there's injuries in the rotation like we saw this past year. He can step up and make a play. If guys like Jordan Montgomery and Erod are struggling, after the second inning, you could just take those guys out and bring in Spencer to close out the game. Like, I think there's a lot of benefits to having a swing man like Spencer Turnbull on your roster for injuries, for depth, for so many reasons. And he's coming off a very, very good season with the Phillies that unfortunately ended with injury. But because of that, could end up being a little bit cheaper of a price tag. So I am interested in Spencer Turnbull, who doesn't throw super hard, around 92, 93, but because his stuff is so good, I would be fine taking a flyer on him. Next up, a guy that we actually saw beat the Arizona Diamondbacks in the World Series, Jose Leclerc, who's coming off a down season in terms of ERA, but the strikeout numbers are still there. Problem is he just gives up too many hits and too many walks. But Leclerc, in terms of the K rate, he still mows down dudes. The 2 seasons prior to 2024, he had a sub 3 ERA. So this is a guy who has been a very, very good reliever. Someone that averages around 95 miles per hour on his fastball. Like, he throws hard. We've seen him have a sub 3 ERA for 2 seasons prior to 2024. Yes, he had a down season this past year with the Texas Rangers, but also his K rate this season was his highest since 2020. And so there were still some underlying numbers that tell you he was good this year. The hard contact numbers allowed on Jose Leclerc were still pretty good this year. So I believe in a Leclerc bounce back. And if the D-backs are able to acquire him, he could end up being a sneaky, really good reliever in the back end of your bullpen next year. Then the final guy I want to discuss is a guy that we've seen pitch a ton in the NL West, but not really be considered. I don't know why he wasn't considered like better or why the Dodgers didn't keep him, but Caleb Ferguson is someone that has always intrigued me. Always big strikeout numbers, a guy who had pretty good ERAs with the Dodgers. He had a 2.89 ERA one year, he had a 1.82 ERA. His final season with the Dodgers, 3.43 ERA, double-digit strikeouts per 9. Yes, the whip was bad because he gave up too many walks and too many hits, but I think Caleb Ferguson is someone that's talented, is someone that has pitched a ton in the NL West, familiar with the opponents. He's someone that fastball averaged like 94 miles per hour this past year, was down 2 ticks from where it was in 2023. So for me, I'm betting on maybe he could get a little bit velocity back and bet on a bounce back for Caleb Ferguson, who is still very young, 28 years of age. If you're telling me he just lost 2 miles per hour off his fastball velocity from 27 to 28 and there's no chance of getting it back, like, yes, he just might be a guy that is already in his decline and is going to be cooked by the time he's 30. But it could just been a down season. Maybe the mechanics were weird. Maybe they're just something that they were doing with the coaching staff where he was this past season, where the D-backs can fix that if we bring him into the building. So I think Caleb Ferguson is also another intriguing option for the D-backs this offseason. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.